Well, as we study drug discovery and development this week, we have some guests in front of you who will help you kind of understand what that happens more on a personal basis in terms of what they do. And today we have a special guest, Dr. Andrew Vick, who works for a company called Will Research. And Andy, thanks for being with us, first of all.
My pleasure.
It's a real pleasure to have you here. And maybe if we could start off by just asking you to describe Will Research, what it is and what do you do there?
Absolutely. So Will Research is a global contract research organization. We actually have sites, several sites in the United States. Our actually largest site in terms of employees is actually in Ashland, Ohio. So just here in Ohio, about halfway in between Columbus and Cleveland. We employ approximately 500 folks at that site, but we also have facilities in Skokie, Illinois, just outside of Chicago, Hillsborough, North Carolina, just outside of Philadelphia. We have a site in Den Bosch, Netherlands, and we have just acquired a facility in Lyon, France. So we are a truly global organization, approximately 1,300 employees, and really dedicated to serving our clients that are largely in the pharmaceutical industry, but also agriculture, chemical industry, companion animal and medical device health, and some other industries, but largely the pharmaceutical industry. And we particularly in the drug discovery, drug development continuum focus on preclinical development, making sure that drugs are safe and effective in animals prior to clinical development.
Excellent. And your current role there?
I am actually just new to Will Research. I think I'll be celebrating my fourth month. New to Will, but not new to the rodeo, as I've said. Yeah. So I'm the Senior Director of Analytical Services. The Analytical Services Group is a culmination of 5 different departments: formulations, analytical chemistry, bioanalytical chemistry with a small molecule focus, bioanalytical chemistry with a large molecule or ligand binding focus, and then our drug metabolism and pharmacokinetics departments.
Great. So all the words we've learned in our course.
Yes.
We've talked about the pharmaceutical disciplines, and this you've kind of maybe it falls a bit under the pharmaceutics heading. Is it fair to say that?
Very much.
Okay.
Most of those would have very much a pharmaceutics backdrop.
Great. So I wonder, you've got some interesting things you're doing. You're working at a very interesting company. So tell us a little bit about your background, maybe your training as well as experiences that brought you here.
So it's a great question. So I grew up, as I mentioned, in Ohio, a very small town, Waldo, Ohio. But from there, had quite the opportunity to join the Ohio State University. So my bachelor's degree is in zoology, and then I went on from bachelor's in zoology to obtain my PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry from the Ohio State University in the building that we're having this conversation in now. Yep. So a great, again, I think a great opportunity to start with great academic training, and so I was very fortunate to receive that from the Ohio State University, and in addition, just have a great deal of workplace experience, both in pharmaceutical industry, at companies such as Biogen IDEC, Eli Lilly, and then have spent approximately the last 7 years on the contract research organization side of the business, partnering with the pharmaceutical industry in support of their drug discovery and drug development needs.
Very cool. So let's talk about that, the idea of contract research organization. And we've studied in our course, we're in an introductory course, so it's very rudimentary, obviously. But we've talked about this, the phases of trials that are undertaken to get a drug to market, and the preclinical and then the clinical trials, and the importance of the clinical trials in the drug development process. So from your standpoint at Will Research and doing this in a global CRO, how important are these clinical trials to you in this whole process, and how does this fit into this whole drug discovery picture?
So great question. So we have the business of the pharmaceutical discovery and development is, as we can imagine, it's not a one-person operation. It requires a team. Sometimes the team can be several hundred to several thousand individuals with unique expertise, the kind of unique expertise that it takes to walk a compound, so to speak, along the drug discovery and drug development continuum, from target identification to lead optimization, to candidate selection, which requires a lot of preclinical development, that requires that we make sure that we understand the disposition and the safety and the tolerability and even the pharmacologic properties of those compounds of interest in animals prior to going into clinical development, where we evaluate in another animal, but a human primate. So where we fit in that, again, as I mentioned earlier, Will Research is largely focused on the preclinical development space. So in this continuum of drug discovery and drug development, not real early. Generally, most of our clients have already done the target identification, some of the lead optimization. So they're bringing their candidates, their pharmaceutical assets that they believe are attractive assets to treating maybe an unmet medical disease, and we're often exploring then their preclinical development. Things that, it sounds like you've been teaching things like, will the compound, the safety of the compound, its toxicologic properties, some of its ADME properties, making sure that it has the drug metabolism and pharmacokinetic characteristics that will allow, that will support its clinical dosing regimen, the proposed frequency of administration, the dose range that is desired to achieve optimal efficacy and maintain, with minimal side effects and all in a way that is commercially viable, that that is attractive from a market standpoint. So we particularly partner in the preclinical space, that testing prior to clinical development, and even the preclinical testing, though, it doesn't stop with clinical development. As the clinical studies progress, both in size and in duration and in cost, the non-clinical or the studies that we're doing in animals is a continuum that parallels the clinical development. So they also extend in size with generally matched duration. So if and often can go to year and a half, 2-year-long carcinogenicity studies or chronic rodent bioassays to even evaluate the carcinogenic potential of products.
Interesting.
We also do a bit of clinical development work, particularly in bioanalysis. So we're characterizing a drug substance, often in the serum and in the plasma, urine, and occasionally feces, and even some biopsy tissues to confirm the exposure in human subjects and start to draw exposure-response relationships that include pharmacokinetic, pharmacodynamic data analysis in the clinic.
A lot of aspects to this, more than meets the eye. When the public talks about drug research, they don't know all the nitty-gritty of all these things you're talking about. And we're learning this week that this is a pretty expensive process. So, to take a compound from, the bench top to FDA approval costs us a lot of money, and I think what you just said helped shed some light on that, but do you have any thoughts on why this is so expensive beyond what you've already told us?
Yes, there's and to add a little bit more data to that, so to the best of my understanding, the process of walking a compound from bench to bedside, I guess where the bedside is, market in this case is a lengthy process. It can be easily 10 years, yep. And our best forecast of cost can be to the tune of $1.5 billion. Yep. So part of the expense is, and as you can imagine, the expense, while the number of compounds is high early on, we reduce that to a few number of compounds and sometimes to a single clinical candidate. But the size of the clinical studies, the duration of the clinical studies, the endpoint intensity of the clinical studies can often culminate into a very significant business investment. I think the other component of it is that we're not only, as a business, we're not only paying for those companies that succeed, but we're paying for we're not only paying for the compounds, or the pharmaceutical assets that succeed, but for those that fail. Yep. And there can be a high degree of attrition along the journey of drug development. And, yep. And so those compounds that may not have exhibited appropriate properties, whether safety related or ADME related, to allow them to be effective in the market or even treating the disease of interest. So, but particularly in the clinical scale, as we traverse the phase 1 through phase 3 clinical development, there can be often a significant increase in size and duration of study and the scope. So ranging from studies that could be as limited as to a dozen or 2 dozen subjects, often healthy volunteers in phase 1, to clinical trials that could include thousands of patients at multiple sites,
Yeah.
not only in the United States but around the world. The other thing that I'd add to that as well in terms of cost is that the regulatory oversight is high, and for good reason. I think some of our regulators and the U.S. FDA, they get held under a bit of a microscope, but their job is to ensure human safety, and so it's a noble and necessary job. But that oversight and some of the changing regulatory environment and the increase in expectations is adding to the cost. And that is, in some regards, an excellent segue back to the CRO, because many companies have identified contract research organizations as a value-added partner. Often contract research organizations are able to support and participate in the drug development process in a way that saves companies time and cost.
Yep. So it's, we talked about collaborative practices in this course. We talked about interdisciplinary collaborations around research. I mean, it takes a village, I guess, to make a drug, doesn't it?
International village.
Yeah.
Yep.
So the last thing I want to ask you, Andy, is I'm guessing there may be people watching this video who think this is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And if I wanted to get involved in an initiative like you're doing, what advice do you have for people? How could I get into this world?
Mm-hmm. So it is cool, and I think, again, I consider myself fortunate most days just to realize that as I kind of examine where I've come from, Waldo, Ohio, to participating in a global pharmaceutical enterprise, it's very cool. Yeah. And to work with the great people that I do, not only within the company, but across the number of the different companies that we serve, thousands of plus clients. But I think it really starts with I think an answer that I made earlier, just with a sound academic training. Mm-hmm. So I'd put a lot of emphasis on just making sure that you receive, not only receive, but put in, the best academic investment you can, and leverage that so that really that success in this business starts with success at the beginning with academic training. Beyond that, I think key also in the industry right now is being flexible. And I do think, even I've alluded to some of the graduate students that I spoke to earlier, it's also a good time to be scientifically diverse. And so not only scientifically diverse, but even non-technically diverse. So making sure that you've evaluated not only a specific or a scientific depth, but added to some of your scientific breadth through some cross-training and other related disciplines. It will serve you well into the pharmaceutical business, which is, as you said, it is a village. And so you'll be in a team matrix-based organization, which will require you to have some subject matter expertise across a lot of different disciplines. I also think, coming back to the non-technical, what it always takes, though, is it takes things that I think come not only from the Ohio State University, but are a product of even the Midwest environment. And maybe I'm a bit biased on that, but just work ethic, passion, loving what we do. I never think of this as a job. I think of it as a career and a vocation, and that we get the opportunity to work in, and again, one of the most noble professions, and help society, whether it be medically related in terms of developing drugs for unmet medical conditions, or other industries that we support that make sure that we're maximizing consumer safety and human health. So I think attitude, passion, and a desire to make a difference, either in your local community or in our global business, are all critical parts to, I think, being successful in not only in your business walk of life, but even in your personal walk of life. So.
Great. Well, good stuff. Thank you so much for kind of giving us a little insight into what happens in a CRO and in this drug development world, and we appreciate you being here.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.